Thank you so very, very much.
All right.
No, but we have had a wonderful time. I've enjoyed it, haven't you?
No.
No.
The moment didn't begin with headlines. IT didn't unfold under flashing cameras or dramatic press conferences. There were no red carpets, no studio announcements, no warning signs to the audience watching from the outside. And yet, something shifted deep inside Hollywood that day, quietly, decisively, and in a way that would reshape one man's career forever. Because when Jack Klugman found himself standing at the center of a growing industry dispute, it wasn't just another contract disagreement. It was a confrontation between an actor's integrity and a system built on control. At the surface, everything appeared normal. Television schedules moved forward. Productions continued. Scripts were written, rehearsed, performed. The machinery of Hollywood operated exactly as expected. But beneath that smooth operation, tension had already taken hold. Because behind closed studio doors, decisions were being made not about creativity, not about storytelling, but about power, about ownership, about who truly controlled the work once the cameras stopped rolling. And Klugman understood something many chose to ignore. This wasn't just about him. It was about every performer whose voice could be silenced once the spotlight faded. The conflict didn't explode overnight. It built slowly, through negotiations, disagreements, and quiet refusals to accept terms that many others had reluctantly signed. While some actors chose security, Klugman chose resistance. And that choice came with consequences. Roles became uncertain. Opportunities narrowed. Conversations grew colder. The same industry that once celebrated his talent now viewed him as difficult. But to those who understood the deeper structure of Hollywood, it wasn't difficulty. It was defiance. Because during that era, television was evolving rapidly. Shows were being syndicated, replayed, redistributed, generating profits long after their original broadcast. Yet the actors who brought those performances to life often saw little of that success reflected back to them. Klugman refused to accept that imbalance. He challenged it, not loudly, not recklessly, but persistently. Meetings stretched longer. Legal discussions grew more complex. Agreements were questioned line by line. What once seemed like routine contracts were now being examined as instruments of control. And inside those negotiations, something began to change. Because when one actor refuses to comply, it forces the system to respond. Studios had a choice: maintain authority or acknowledge fairness. And for a time, it seemed clear which direction they preferred. Pressure increased. Isolation became a tool. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Fall in line or stand alone. Klugman chose to stand. And that decision quietly redefined his position within Hollywood. He was no longer just an actor delivering performances. He became a participant in a larger struggle, one that extended beyond scripts and screens into the very structure of the entertainment industry itself. Behind the scenes, others were watching, some in silence, some with quiet support. Because while few were willing to step forward publicly, many recognized the significance of what was happening. This wasn't just a personal dispute. It was a shift, a moment where the balance between talent and control was being questioned. As time passed, the impact of that resistance began to surface in subtle ways. Contracts evolved. Conversations changed. The idea that actors deserved a lasting share of their work's success slowly gained ground, not as a sudden revolution, but as a gradual adjustment. And at the center of that adjustment stood Klugman, not as a headline figure, not as a public crusader, but as someone who refused to accept the system as it was. Because in Hollywood, the most significant battles are rarely fought on screen. They happen in offices, in negotiations, in decisions made quietly without applause. This was one of those battles. A fight not for fame, but for fairness. A moment where one actor stands challenged an entire system's assumptions. And while the audience never saw it unfold in real time, the effects lingered, shaping the industry in ways that would only be fully understood years later. Because sometimes the most powerful performances don't happen under studio lights. They happen when someone decides not to perform at all. The moment didn't end when the meetings adjourned. IT didn't fade when contracts were signed or negotiations paused. Because what had been set in motion inside Hollywood was no longer confined to a single disagreement. It had become a quiet, expanding shift. And at the center of that shift remained Jack Klugman, no longer just navigating a dispute, but redefining his place within an industry that had long operated on unchallenged assumptions. The consequences of his stance didn't arrive all at once. They appeared gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Phone calls slowed. Opportunities became conditional. Projects that once felt certain began to dissolve into uncertainty. This was not coincidence. It was the system responding. Because in Hollywood, resistance rarely meets confrontation directly that IT meets distance. Studios didn't need to announce their position. They demonstrated it through silence, through hesitation, through the subtle redirection of roles toward those who were easier to manage, easier to align, easier to control. And yet, Klugman didn't retreat. If anything, the pressure clarified his position, because what he had begun to challenge was larger than a single contract dispute. It was a long-standing imbalance between those who created value on screen and those who retained control behind it. At the time, television was entering a new era. Shows were no longer limited to a single broadcast window. Through syndication, reruns, and expanding distribution channels, content could generate revenue indefinitely. But the actors, the faces audiences connected with, were often excluded from that long-term success. Klugman saw that clearly, and more importantly, he refused to ignore it. Inside negotiation rooms, the tone began to shift. What were once standard agreements were now questioned. Clauses that had been accepted without resistance were now examined with precision. Language mattered. Ownership mattered. Longevity mattered. These were not abstract concerns. They were structural ones. And challenging structure always comes at a cost. There were moments when compromise would have been easier, moments when stepping back could have restored immediate stability. But Klugman understood something critical. Short-term comfort often reinforces long-term imbalance. So he held his ground, not with spectacle, not with public outrage, but with consistency. And consistency, over time, becomes influence. Behind the scenes, others began to take notice. Writers, performers, and even some within the production side recognized the implications of what he was doing. Because if one actor could question the system, others could follow. Quiet conversations started happening. Concerns once dismissed as inevitable were now being reconsidered. It wasn't a movement, not yet, but it was awareness. And awareness is where change begins. Meanwhile, Klugman's career continued, but on different terms. He wasn't simply navigating roles anymore. He was navigating reputation. In an industry that often equates compliance with professionalism, his refusal to conform placed him in a complicated position.